Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing podcast number 84. This is Sunday, March 5th, 2017. And today's guest is an American composer, concert organist, writer, editor and consultant, Carson Cooman, with a catalog of hundreds of works in many forms, from solo instrumental pieces to operas and from orchestral works to hymn tunes. Since 2006, Cooman has held the position of composer in residence at the Memorial Church, Harvard University, and from 2008 until 11, he also served as composer in residence to the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Boston, Massachusetts. Since 2015, he has been organ editor for Lorenz publishing company. Carson's music has been performed on all 6 inhabited continents in venues that range from stage of Carnegie Hall to the basket of a hot air balloon. Cooman's music appears on over 40 recordings, including more than 20 complete CDs on the Naxos, Albany, Artek, Gothic, Divine Art, Métier, Diversions, Convivium, Altarus, MSR Classics, Raven and Zimbel labels. Cooman's primary composition studies were with Bernard Ranz, Judith Ware, Alan Fletcher and James Willey. As an active concert organist, Cooman specializes in the performance of contemporary music. Over 150 new compositions by more than 100 international composers have been written for him, and his organ performances can be heard on a number of CD recordings. Cooman is also a writer on musical subjects, producing articles and reviews frequently for a number of international publications. He serves as an active consultant on music business matters to composers and performing organizations, specializing particularly in the area of composer estates and archives. In this conversation, Carson shares his insights about his love of contemporary music, about his organ compositions, about this process of composing new music, about his initiative to create new works for chamber organs, and many other things. This is a particularly inspiring talk. Let's go to the show. So, Carson, thank you so much for joining in this conversation. I was following your work online and so delighted that you are actually composing new music constantly, performing new music constantly, and your YouTube channel looks basically terrific, and actually not terrific, terrifyingly majestic. You know, over 900 compositions, right, over there. I found it's gigantic. How can you record all of this? It's basically, thank you so much for your generosity and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful. I first was introduced, Carson, to your work actually by one of my subscribers, Howard Ward, who recommended you as a performer of contemporary organ music, and he was very interested also into Carlotta Ferrari's compositions, and I know you have recorded and performed quite a bit, right? So
I have, yes.
Let's thank for our introduction our common friend now, Howard Ward. Howard,
yes,
if you're listening, thanks so much for introducing us. It's very wonderful to meet new people online like this. So if anybody is listening right now and has an idea about if they could introduce 2 people who could work together, might be a good fit. It's a very powerful idea. I reach out to Carlotta and to Carson, and we've been connected, and many people can do that the same with other organists and composers and organ builders, you name it, right? It's very powerful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. So, Carson, I know you are very much into contemporary music, right? You even created
Yes.
your own composing system, right? Which you can even describe a little bit later. So, what got you interested into organ and composition? Do you remember the first story how you fell in love with the organ?
I heard the organ first in church when I was quite young, and I was studying. I had taken piano lessons, but was certainly attracted to the organ, and at some point, sort of switched my focus over to learning and playing the organ as an instrument. I've been composing since about age 10. I think of myself as a composer first, an organist second. But the organ is certainly a very important part of my life. I do love it as an instrument, and but on another level, the organ is very much for me a means to an end, and the end is performing and engaging with the contemporary music that I love. And if I were a flutist or a clarinetist, I'd be doing basically exactly the same things I'm doing now, just with a different instrument. So I'm not one of those organists that it's just about the organ itself for its own sake. That doesn't interest me as much, because for me it's all about the repertoire, the music itself. And in my case, it's contemporary music by many, many living and recently living composers from all over the world.
It's so powerful, Carson, actually to create a living legacy, right? You are a living composer, and I'm talking to you, right? I do compose also a little bit today, and I can relate very much. And people around the world also not only are listening who are organists, but sometimes people really create, and some of them are composers. So I very much respect organists or even musicians in general, who are actually creating, not only performing, but somehow felt this calling to create, to leave something behind other than perform other people's work. So I'm very glad you heard this calling for yourself.
Thanks.
So Carson, how did you actually become interested into creating or composing? Who had the first idea? Were you always composing like Mozart from early ages, or later on? What happened first?
It was fairly early. I think a lot of composers, you sort of start by making things up, and then at some point thinking about formalizing those in some ways, writing them down, and at some point, it became clear to me that composition was something that appealed to me in a sort of structured and serious way, and so I did and continue to pursue that as my primary endeavor. And I think it's because of that I was so and remain so interested in contemporary music in general by other composers, because it's all related to the sort of sounds and interests and kinds of styles and things that people are working in today. And that interests me in my own work, and it interests me in the work I deal with from other composers as well.
How would you describe your original style? Of course, it has to be original, right? Because you came up with the system itself, with the modal system. Can you describe a little bit and that's sort of a tangent in a sense. Does not have a great deal to do with my own work per se. It's really more to do with let's see if I can be clearer. I don't use that system really very much in my own work. I haven't used it as much, and it really came up in the context of the work I was doing with Carlotta Ferrari. That about 10 years ago, I developed the restarting pitch space modal system, and it was in the course of these many new pieces that I was working on with her that I decided that it was a good opportunity to see if she was interested in working with this further, which she was. So that's it's sort of my one foray into that area. I'm a composer first. I'm not a theorist. I prefer doing to talking about doing, and so
thus the restarting pitch space system, it doesn't really define the core of my own musical personality, but it has been a sort of interesting endeavor these last few years, particularly in all the work I've been doing with Carlotta, who's been especially interested in it.
To remind our listeners what restarting pitch space means is that you create like a mode or a scale, right? Let's say from C.
Yeah, it's a system that develops. It develops a mode by taking fragments of another scale and transposing them across the space. And the most important property of it deals with the fixing of pitches in their particular register. And so what you've basically done is created a sort of super mode across the entire range of notes of the musical instrument in question, and then that's the material for the composition. There's information online that explains it a bit more clearly than what's happening. But at the end of the day, it's about the music that results like any system, and it's whether you connect with the music or not. And certainly, I developed this idea originally and have made some use of it myself, but certainly Carlotta has really taken to it in a very deep way, and has written many, many pieces that sort of really push it to a variety of expressive ends. And so in that case, it relates more to my collaborative work with other composers, in this case her, than it does so much to my own music. Although she and I have just completed for the first time writing a piece together collaboratively, going back and forth with different sections, which is something I've never done before with anybody. Composers tend to be very controlling over over our own work, and I am no different than that. It's very hard to think about doing something with someone else like that. But she and I have a special artistic relationship, and so we decided to give it a try. So that's very interesting. That's been an interesting endeavor.
How did it work? Did you compose a few bars each and then submit?
We did sections. Yeah, we did sections. We did it sort of in the exquisite corpse model, where you go back and forth, and you only see a little bit of what the other person has done, and then at the end you put it all together. So just the last couple days, in fact, we just sort of finished putting it together. So now I need to learn it and play it, and then we'll see if we like it.
Did the final results surprise you from what you thought about first?
I think not hugely, because she and I know each other musically so well at this point. I think we both know sort of what the other is going to do in some ways. So in that sense, we wanted to make something that wasn't just a gimmick. We wanted to try and make something that was a piece together. So it was an interesting thing. As I said, most of the time, we composers are just off on our own, doing our own creating all alone, and not showing anything to anyone until it's done. So it's fun to push oneself outside of one's comfort zone a bit and try something that's a little different. So we did that.
And Carson, of course, you are composing not only for the organ, but you are, let's say, a real composer, right? You composing for a wide variety of instruments.
It's true.
You compose operas, right? Symphonies, and oratorios, right?
Right, and I mean that's one of the reasons why I say that I do think of myself firstly as a composer and second as an organist, because for me composing, though I certainly do compose a lot of music for the organ, the composing is not because of the organ. It's something I do regardless, and I enjoy writing for the organ, and there are many wonderful organist colleagues in the world who play and continue to play my music, for which I'm very grateful. But I get a great deal of enjoyment from the projects for other instruments and combinations as well, certainly.
What was the first piece you created? Do you remember?
It was a piece for cello, actually.
Not for the organ.
It was not for the organ. It was during a couple years where I was also studying the cello when I was very young, and so it was just a vicissitude of timing at that point that I happened to be doing that, and particularly when you're beginning, the cello being a sort of one-line instrument is a simpler notation exercise than a keyboard instrument. So.
Right, and of course now you're composing any type of any genre, right? Any setting. So
many genres.
Many genres. Do you have do you keep opus numbers to keep track of the?
I do.
How many of them?
I do. 1,180 some odd at the moment. Yeah.
No kidding. Wow, you're very prolific.
It's just a cataloging system. You know, when you have a lot of pieces, you need some way to keep track of them all. So
exactly.
I need a database and all the things that go with that. So that's why I give every piece a number.
I think it's better to do this while composer is living than a few centuries after that, because it would be very difficult for the fans of that composer to go back and research all the material. But you're, of course, very organized about that and making things simpler for future generations, right?
Sure. It's mostly so I don't lose track of it myself. You know, who knows about the future, but at the very least, I need to be able to find things. The only way I can do that is if I have some way of cataloging them.
How long does it take for you to create, let's say, a piece of, let's say, do you have a routine or a structure or a timeline? How does it work? What your normal composition process looks today? Can you share a secret?
Sure. I mean, it varies to some degree. Some pieces come together pretty quickly and others take a long time. But generally, I spend a lot of time thinking about the piece mentally before I write anything down. And my composing projects are usually planned out very far in advance. So I know what I need to do for the next couple years, for example. And so right now, even though I'm not actually writing something that I might need to do next year, there's some part of my mind that's turning that around. And so in general, I find if I have enough preparatory time, then when it comes time to sit down and do the actual writing out of the piece, it goes pretty quickly. But you never know. And it doesn't seem to have any impact on the resulting piece. Sometimes, you know, something that you've agonized over forever and ever sort of is fine and disappears without a trace. Something that came together in a day becomes very popular. So you never have any idea. You just have to, you know, do the best you can to make each piece as good as you can make it.
Do you use computer software, or you're happy with pencil and pen? Or paper?
I do both. I prefer to do the initial copy with the pen and paper, and then it goes into the computer. I mean, everything goes into the computer these days, but I prefer not to start with the computer. I have on occasion when time is really short, but I prefer not to. The pen and paper, the computer tries to make you think the way it thinks, and it's nice with the pen and paper. It's just completely blank. You don't have to worry about how things look or where the bar lines go or any of that. The computer's always wanting you know, what is the meter? What is it? You have to put in all those things, and I think it can often be a real hamper to the creativity because you just do what the computer thinks is easiest. But no question, the computer is an amazing tool for producing the final scores. You know, none of that way you don't have to suffer through anyone's handwriting anymore. And certainly when it comes to things like orchestra pieces, in the amount of time that it takes to make orchestra parts is so reduced, or piano reductions, you know, for an oratorio or something. So the computer is wonderful, but I at least still prefer to have most of the creative process happen on paper.
Do you like to play on the keyboard, electronic keyboard?
I do not usually. No. I pretty much compose at a desk without the keyboard.
So you hear the notes inside, right?
Yeah. I find sometimes when you work at the keyboard, you end up really writing keyboard music, and many of the pieces are not keyboard pieces. So I feel sometimes it traps you into things that work well under the keyboard or work well under your hands, but aren't necessarily the right choices for the piece in question. If it's a choral piece or a chamber piece or an orchestra piece. I mean, when it is keyboard music, I always spend some time after I've written it out. I spend some time playing it at the keyboard, you know, to make revisions and edits, make sure everything fits comfortably under the hands and all of that. But I prefer not to have the initial creative work at the keyboard in general. There are always exceptions to everything, you know. Not one doesn't always do everything exactly the same way. But
can you compose actually without any keyboard, just on the table? And the result will be satisfying to you, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it takes really a amazing inner hearing, inner ear, perfect pitch, or anything. How did you develop this abilities?
Just by doing
it, right?
By doing it a lot, and you sort of the things I can hear best are the kinds of things I do, and you develop a sort of way of doing your own work, and sort of the more, for me at least, the more in my earlier years I forced myself to work that way, the better I got at being able to hear and produce on paper exactly what it is that I'm hearing in my head.
Many people couldn't even reproduce a simple hymn or, let's say, happy birthday on paper, without any singing. But what we are talking about is a very deep and advanced level of hearing, right?
Sure. I think I think everyone works differently, and there are many. I mean, there have been many amazing composers who work with the piano, and people like Ravel and Stravinsky Aaron Copland, they never wrote anything without working at the piano. They never worked at it. They were completely tied to the piano. But I mean, that's some of the greatest music of its time. So it's not, it's not like there was anything less about doing that. Everyone just has to find their own particular working way. And so for me, the way I work, whether it's on paper first and the fact that I don't use the computer until the end, or the fact that I prefer not to use the keyboard, those are my personal choices. Over time, it's the way that I work that comes to be best for me. But I certainly don't intend to say that I think that's the way everyone needs to work or needs to work in order to produce good music. So that's the only thing I worry about when thinking about the notion of hearing on paper something as having an advanced thing, because many advanced and wonderful people have done excellent work with the piano too. So
I'm a big advocate for creating either on paper or on the instrument spontaneously, like improvisation. And when I talk to people, specifically to organists in this case, many people are shy and feel this, sense of low self-esteem is sort of a little bit, and say, "Oh, no, I'm not talented. Let's leave it to the composers, this creativity," right? How would you react to this remark?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I think there's value to some degree in everyone having some creative experience and being able to do that. On the other hand, I am also someone that believes in the value of specialization and focus and skilled training. And so in that sense, there is a ton of music in the world already, and there's a lot of people writing it. There's a lot more of it than there actually is that's getting played. And so in that sense, I sort of see both sides of it, because I think as an exercise there is certainly valid things that can be gained from encouraging one's own creativity, even if one doesn't primarily think of themselves as the composer. But of course, on the other hand, as someone who sees and has trained and considers himself a professional composer, I take what I do very seriously, and so the notion of just sort of dipping in and out at times. In the same way that like a doctor takes the work they do seriously. You're not a surgeon who just does it a little bit here and then goes and does other things. Like, no, you take it, it's your thing, and you've trained to do it, and you do it very seriously. And so I see the importance of that kind of preparation and realization as well.
Now, you mentioned doctor, surgeon, right? If a person wants to become a professional doctor, he has to go to the medical school, get training for many, many years, right? Composers also need to go to composition school and study with certified professors. Yes, and you did, right? But
yes.
There are some people who are and learn the ropes by doing it, right?
There absolutely are. Yeah. And there are certainly different people that come into things through different ways. That's why I said I feel like it's not a cut or dried thing. I can't say it should always be this way, and that the only way you can do it is this way. But on the other hand, I also feel like it shouldn't always be the other way, because there's a lot of people whose work would be much better if they were either trained or had taken the time to gain more self-training, rather than just sort of self-indulgently sort of spewing something out. So I think both things are relevant. Both the sort of discipline that study and training can provide, but of course at some level what the training is doing for a composer is shaping an inherent creativity that's already there. I think it's very hard to make a composer out of someone that doesn't already have some degree of interest and drive to do it. You have to have that. And what the formal study is about honing and refining that innate drive into producing work that is solid technically.
And when you remember your first piece for the cello, right? Was it at the level you would write today for the cello, let's say?
No, certainly not. No, I mean I think very few people write works at their very beginning that are of the level of what they would write later. Even people like Mozart. People talk about Mozart beginning at an early age, and he certainly did. But a lot of those early pieces are terrible, really, by the particularly when you think of the standards of what he was able to produce in his maturity before his life was cut short. So, I think everyone does a certain kind of work at the beginning, and that's important because you have to do what you're doing at the level you can at that point. But then it's through both training and through greater experience, one becomes better at doing what one's doing, and I would hope that continues until one is dead. I hope that every piece gains something from the one that came before it, and it continues to refine and improve and be better at achieving the goals that one has for oneself.
There is an interesting theory. 10,000 hours. You might have heard, right? The famous.
Oh yes, right. That's right. Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah,
I think it was. Wasn't it? Yeah.
Which is actually today a little bit disputed in some circles.
Yes, right. I saw. Yeah, as with most of the things that he and others do, they say one thing and then everyone comes in to challenge it, and then they fight back. And the truth is probably some mix of it. I mean, again, I think it's hard to say one size fits all because some people are very quick learners, some people are very intuitive, some people end up producing really wonderful things, but it takes a tremendous amount for them to get there. They have to spend a lot of time learning, a lot of time refining, and it doesn't come easily to them at all. Other people, certain things come very easily. And I think it's hard to come up with an overarching theory that accounts for all those differences because every person is inherently a different person.
And you know what I've heard just recently? Not 10,000 hours is important, but 1,000 hours is important. Because how you divide those 1,000, you learn the craft in 500 hours. Just basic at the basic level, the groundwork, right? And you basically learn the another field, completely perhaps unrelated field, another 500 hours, and you combine those fields and become unique at the intersection of those fields. That's another theory sometimes people use today. Because today naturally people juggle many things, instead of being interested in just one craft.
Sure.
So, Carson, I'm very curious to know what would you recommend our listeners to listen first as an introduction to your work, to your style, to your legacy? Color.
Well, in terms of my own organ compositions, you mean?
Sure. Yes, that would be a good start.
I mean, there are a colleague of mine, Eric Simmons, has been recording many of my organ compositions. It's not officially a sort of complete Organ Works project, but it's sort of turning into that. And he has released a number of CDs on the Divine Art label that are readily available. And those are really excellent. They're performances that I sort of supervised and think he just did a tremendous job with my work. And I think across those recordings, you certainly hear a variety of the different things I do. The organ symphony you mentioned is in there, and some preludes and fugues, and some. There's a recent 2-disc set called Preludio that's entirely pieces in a modern style that are very connected to Renaissance and early Baroque music. So across all of those, there's certainly a fairly wide variety of the different things that I do for the organ, at least.
And other style, other instruments, what would be the good representation of your work, or other genres, let's say?
Other genres, there are several CDs on Naxos of my orchestra music. There are a couple excellent CDs of choral music, one on Naxos, one on Gothic called The Welcome News, one on Convivium called The Evening Choir. Those are all excellent. My website has a fairly, has a list of them. Again, I have a lot of pieces and there are a lot of recordings of them. So it can, I think, feel a little overwhelming to delve into it. But I'm certainly grateful for anyone who's interested in any part of it. One doesn't need to listen to absolutely everything.
So, Carson, you probably consider yourself as a professional composer, right? Today,
I would say so.
Who does compose for the living, right? At which point of your life did you discover the need to be a professional composer instead of composing on the side, or did you always wanted to compose?
I think from the time, when I was in high school, before going to college, before going to university, it was at that point that I really decided for myself that composing would be my primary thing, and certainly from that point it was clear that this would be the main thing, and that pursuing this in a professional way was what I wanted to do. There was no question of doing something else and doing it on the side. That works fine for many people. There's been a number of people that have done that and do good work, but that was not what I wanted to do. I really wanted to be immersed in the musical world entirely, as much as possible.
Do you have your muses, your mentors, who inspire you today?
It's very hard to name people because there are so many people that I work with, and I hate to single out composers just because I work with so many, and composers get very territorial and jealous when you mention one person's name. Then you get you record one person's piece, and then you immediately get a message from someone else saying, "Why didn't you record my piece?" So, it's a little annoying, but it is the way.
It's even strange you receive those messages, right?
I don't mean to complain, but it is funny. But there is the sense among some composers that if you're giving one person attention, you're depriving them of attention. But we composers can be a very selfish bunch, clearly. Anyway, but what really inspires me is working with so many living composers who are writing wonderful music in very personal ways, and I've always been most attracted to composers whose work has a really defined personality. And I will name three people, because the three composers whose music I've played the most of in the last few years are Carlotta Ferrari, who we mentioned, who is Italian, and Lothar Grapp, who is German, and Thomas Åberg, who is Swedish. And the three of them, I've recorded multiple recordings of their music, quite several CD releases, and then many, many more things online on YouTube. And they've been three of many composers that I've really specialized in. And the three of them write in very different styles, but the one thing that unifies them is that each one of them has a very, very strong personality that comes through in their work. And in the case of those three, also a real sense of national identity. Thomas's music is extremely Swedish, and Lothar Grapp's music is extremely German, and Carlotta's music, I think, in many cases, is very Italian. And so I also find that very interesting.
Thomas Åberg's work I might have heard even in Vilnius. I have to remember here in Lithuania.
It's possible. His music has been played a lot, and he used to tour himself quite a bit as an organist.
I think James D. Hicks might have played him through
Indeed.
his Nordic Journey series.
Yes. No, Jim does know Thomas as well, and has included a few of his pieces as part of that amazing mammoth endeavor that Jim has been doing for Scandinavian music. But yes. Thomas is a wonderful composer. His music is extremely Swedish. It's extremely personal, and it's a delight to play and hear, and I continue to enjoy programming it even after a number of years now.
And how do you find those composers? How do you discover them, or they discover you?
I'm sort of, well, sometimes it's that particular. Certainly, there is more of that these days. That people, a lot of people do send me things, but I am constantly seeking things out. I'm listening to things. I'm listening to what other people are playing. I'm ordering new scores constantly. I'm looking at whatever is newly published or not. And I go through voluminous quantities of music every year, piles and piles and piles of it. And that's a small fraction of that is what grabs me and are the pieces that I really want to play, or the composers whose work suddenly speaks to me in a deep way and I decide to really go in depth with. So it's an ever-growing thing, and it's so, to me, the sense that there's always more of it, and that there's always people that are there to still be discovered, and people still writing and new things, is just continually exciting. It's just a sort of exhilarating feeling for me to constantly be able to know that there's more ahead.
And you also are a music editor, right? You edit new submissions, right?
Yeah, I direct the publications in the organ area and some of the choral area for the Lorenz Corporation and Sacred Music Press, one of the large music publishers here in the USA. And that work is very connected as well. It's, again, about developing developing projects with new composers, seeking out music, bringing about new works for the instrument for the market. So yes, I am also involved in that.
It's sort of like book publishing in a way, right? Only for music.
It is. It's I enjoy it very much. It's a tremendous company to work for. They have been so supportive of me and my sort of wide-ranging interests when it comes to the organ and contemporary music, and I'm very grateful to have them sort of behind me, supporting these publications and the new projects that I'm seeking out and developing with all sorts of composers. And the goal is that we publish organ and some choral music that is useful and appealing and fresh to a whole lot of organists, especially in the U.S. where our large market is, but also in other places around the world. There's certainly been increasing interest. The internet has certainly been the great leveler in availability, and now I'm constantly ordering music from publishers in Europe that don't have distributors in the USA, and I know vice versa. There are European musicians in other countries that are ordering music from our American publishers. So it's been good as well. We've also then been able to publish some music by composers that aren't American, but sort of introducing some of their work to the American market, which I think is also wonderful, and just is another opportunity for some fresh perspectives, and to put some new music in front of people by names that might be new to them.
You don't feel that interest for the new contemporary music is diminishing, probably?
I don't think so. I think it's certainly in the last however many decades. It's always been a somewhat small. It's a sub part of a sub part. But you figure music is one category in the world, and music is a small category out of all the things in the world. And then classical music, concert music, within that is a small category, and then within that is contemporary music, and then within that is contemporary organ music. So we have our little, at the end we just work our way down to our little area in which we work, and that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. There are wonderful people who seem to enjoy the music that I write and the music that I play by other people and the music that we publish. And so as long as there are people that are still interested in it, I intend to continue doing it.
And look at yourself. You are deeply committed. You are very enthusiastic about that. So are probably other people around the world who are specializing in contemporary music. Maybe there are not too many of them, but they are deep into it, right? They buy everything that is published. They play everything, right? They recommend everything, and you are friends with many people like that, right? So it's a big one, small community, let's say, in a big world.
It is. It is. And what we're doing in, say, contemporary music and contemporary organ music may not interest everybody in the larger world and larger society, but I still feel a calling to do it, and I feel that there are enough people out there who are inspired and engaged as well.
Mm-hmm. And of course, majority of organists would probably be happy staying with Bach, Buxtehude, Frank, and Vierne for the most part. But,
sure.
But
sure.
They don't know what they're missing, actually.
Yeah.
Actually,
I think that some of it, I've actually found in some ways organists are more open to some degree of new music than many other instrumentalists are. You know,
really?
for example, pianists. Or violinists in general tend to be very, very unaware of contemporary music, or they're a specialist and they do nothing but that. There's very little middle ground. I've actually found, and this is not scientifically studied, obviously, just personally, anecdotally, my own experience, that I found there are more organists who are willing to include some contemporary music, and that's fine. I mean, I am I'm a performer who does exclusively contemporary music. That's what I'm interested in. But I would never seek to impose that on anyone else. Not everyone else has to do only that one thing. And so the fact that they find a few pieces that they like and play them, or a few composers, that's wonderful, and that's totally fine. And I actually have found that I think there's a greater openness among organists than there are in some other instruments. So it's not as bad as I think it could be, particularly, if you go to a conservatory and you speak to concert pianists, many of whom couldn't name a living composer.
Right, the organists are more curious, probably.
I think so, and I think it's also because organists in general, almost every organist has some connection or work in the church. And that means you play a lot of music because you have services at least every week, often more, often additional things. That means you're playing a lot of music. You're playing a lot of music. That's not the same thing as being a solo piano recitalist where you tour around and play the same program over and over again. You have a couple concerti that you play with, It's like you're at the same church week after week, and you have to give them new. You can't just play the same piece every single week. So I think for that reason, and because many organists are also church choir directors, and I think because of that, there's just the Sundays keep coming. The Sundays keep coming, and the people keep coming and keep filling the pews, and we have to give them material. So I think from that there's an innate curiosity that people in this field have, because you have to keep finding new stuff to do. Exactly. Whether it's contemporary music or just new to you, older music that's less well known or whatnot. You can't sing the same piece every Sunday or play the same prelude every week. So.
Organists are very blessed in a way because they have this inherent situation for public performance every week, right?
Yes, that is also really very special for organists. To have a chance to try out so much music, and again, not just contemporary music, but music in general. The fact that you do have this opportunity for public performance every week, and one always wants to be putting forth one's best, which I would hope for this. But it's also not always as stressful of a situation as, say, performing a major recital at a national organist convention or something like that, where the stakes are very high, and it's one can try things in church in a different way. You try that piece for the prelude, or you try it sort of along the way as you're learning it. You say, my interpretation of this is not totally honed yet, but I'm going to play it this week and see how it goes, and then take something from that experience towards continuing to practice it and refine it for performance. And that, to be able to do that in public, like organists can in church, is a real gift, because otherwise you're just sitting in a practice room somewhere, or sitting in your living room, playing at your walls.
Exactly. And Carson, how does your audience react to a constant flow of new music during your recitals?
It's been very positive. I mean, nobody is surprised per se. I've always done this, and this is what I do. So if someone asks me to come and play a recital, like, they know what they're going to get.
Exactly.
They know I'm not gonna come and play the Bach and Vidor and things that everyone else is already playing for them. So it's not that. I am grateful that often audience members do not know that going in, but I certainly frequently do receive comments that people enjoy the experience in a way that they didn't think they would with unfamiliar music. And I think some of that it's also about choosing the pieces one plays and what places. And though the program is an all contemporary program always, the kind of program I would play, say, at a church on a recital series say in a small church is different from the kind of program I would play on a concert for the composition department at a university.
Exactly.
There would be some pieces of overlap, but there are some pieces that are more suited for one context than the other, and some of that is just it's just being aware. I've never been the sort of organist that has basically a few programs and just plays the same programs everywhere, no matter what the organ is. The programs I do are the pieces are very much chosen to both the organ and the context at hand. And so I feel that by taking that effort, I think it helps already make it presents what I hope is putting the contemporary music out there with its best foot forward and showing it off in the best light possible, rather than just sort of saying, okay, here's the music, just play it, throw it. And I try and do other things. I always prepare program notes for the concerts. Always. I feel that's very important, so that they can read something about these composers. They might know a little bit about the life of, say, Beethoven, but they wouldn't, they might not know anything about the life of Carlotta Ferrari. So it's nice to give them a little bit of background. And then also notes that I or the composer have written about the specific piece in question, which I think is also a help. And again, people can either engage with those notes or not, to whatever extent they want, but at least they're there. Because I think context is important, particularly because in almost all cases of the audience, they're hearing pieces that they've never heard before.
Right. Do you like, Carson, talking between the pieces yourself?
I do not. In general, and that's just a personal thing. I really don't like talking in recitals. I think there's way, way, way too much of it these days. I think there's this tendency now with performers to just sort of yammer on and on between the pieces. So I admit that's totally a personal taste thing. It drives me crazy to sit and listen to someone talk constantly, and so I try and do as little of the talking as possible. People make arguments either way. That's fine. For me, I prefer to have the notes, because I prefer that people can read them at their own pace during the piece. Yes. Otherwise, if I stood up there and just tell them things about the piece, they've already forgotten it as they're trying to listen. So I generally speak as little as possible. I take the cue from the host of the concert series. If they want me to say something in one place or two places, something brief, that's fine. But I do not enjoy this trend of verbal program notes. I think it distracts from the flow of the music as a concert experience, and I think it's much less helpful for the audience, in my opinion, than giving them notes. And I think it's also the music itself is what needs to communicate with them, and playing of the music. And if you have to stand up there and talk about the music, like most people don't speak as well as they play, most concert organists. And so it's often a very disappointing experience. They sort of say some things and then they sit down and they play, and it's very good. And I would rather just have the playing. Again, you'll find there's been many debates in the letters sections of the organ magazines and stuff about this. Some people are like me and can't stand the talking. Other people think it's wonderful. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but you asked me my opinion, so that is my personal opinion. But.
Carson, how interesting. People who are listening to you right now would think the exact opposite, right? Because you're such a great storyteller. Right now on the show, and I would think that you would like to talk, during the performance, but probably not.
No, I mean, because I feel it's a different. This is an interview here,
right?
Interview conversation. We're not dealing in music right now. We're talking about music, but we're not. But to me, the concert is a very special experience. The concert recital, a very special experience where I've put together a program of music that I want to share, and these are the pieces I want to share. These are the sounds, the work by the composers that I can't wait to share with this audience. And to me, my sitting up there and talking distracts from that. They didn't come for a lecture.
Yes.
They came to hear these pieces, and by giving them the notes, I feel I'm giving them the context that they can read and absorb at their own pace.
Exactly.
And that the best thing I can do for the people in the audience and for the composers who have written these pieces that I'm privileged to play is to perform them in as communicative a fashion as possible. And that is the way of sharing it with the audience, not my playing it and then trying to tell them about it in words. Because to some degree, if we could do it all in words, we wouldn't need to write the pieces.
Oh, yes, exactly. That's a great idea. So, in other words, you're saying that if the music doesn't communicate, maybe that's the wrong audience or the wrong music, right? Or the wrong performer.
Yes. I think that's the wrong performer. I think it's a fallacy to think that you can make up for that just by talking about it more.
Exactly. I totally agree with you because there are really different settings, different expectations from the audience, right? People, some people don't like to be distracted, right?
Right. And I think it also depends on the context. I have done some programs where I'm sort of that are where I'm like, particularly for other organists, where I'm really sharing the music, and those are much more informal. In that case, sure, could talk about it. But in terms of a concert presentation, I plan the order of the pieces very carefully. I plan the sequence. I plan the amount of time overall carefully. All of that's part of that. And the more talking there is, the more that balance is upset.
I know, Carson, that you also are very unique in the organ world because you also generate a lot of music for the small chamber organs, right?
Yes.
Which is actually totally forgotten instrument as a contemporary medium, right? So
yes, that's a big interest.
Can you share a little bit what got you interested into composing for chamber organ?
Certainly composing, but also I've commissioned and encouraged a lot of pieces from other composers for the chamber organ as well. And for me, it was just seeing something that I think was neglected by a lot of organ composers. I think the inheritance of so much contemporary organ composition today is sort of entirely post-French Romantic, and it's just all these big organs and big. It's just everything is big and loud and toccata-ish all the time, and that stuff is exciting to be sure, but I think there is real value in the smallest organs as well, and I think there's also a trend among certain organists to who are only interested in the biggest organs, the bigger the better. How many manuals does it have? And again, it's very exciting to sit in a huge cathedral and play a huge 5-manual organ with hundreds of stops. There's no question that's an exciting experience. But I think there's a wonderful intimacy that's possible on smaller instruments, smaller organs, even the very smallest organs. And my reason for pushing this area in contemporary music is I feel like historically there's been a lot more music. There's been other periods of time where there has been music that's very suitable for small organs. Certainly in the early era, obviously, there's many, many pieces that can be played on organs of almost any size, from the very smallest. And in the early 20th century, particularly, you had this sort of overlap period with the harmonium. And so you had a lot of pieces that could be played on small salon organs and things at home. But then sort of the big French Romantic influence sort of crushed out everything else. And so now most new organ music that's being written is the vast majority is for large instruments. So I just felt a need to try and push back against that by bringing about some smaller things. And in some cases, we're talking very, very small organs, which I love playing. I love playing. I love giving recitals on small organs. I've even given a recital on an organ that had just a single stop, just one stop.
And how long was the recital?
About an hour.
Wow, you had the audience's interest and focus for an hour. That's amazing.
all contemporary. So I think it's totally possible. You just have to choose accordingly. You have to choose accordingly and prepare. And so I think this project for me is just a bit an effort to bring about. To both bring about new repertoire for this and to play this repertoire on these instruments. Again, because there are certainly organists who play small organs wonderfully, but almost all of them are early music people.
Yes.
And they play only early pieces. And that's great, but what I want to say by playing recitals in these instruments and commissioning and performing all these new pieces is that brand new music can also be written very effectively for these organs. The new organ music is not just for the big, huge instruments. There's also wonderful brand new music for these little organs, and we don't have to only play early pieces on them.
It's amazing.
I think the early music renaissance in the 20th century has meant that so many of the very smallest organs are really used only for accompanying early music ensembles, for playing the continuo parts.
Yeah.
You know, we have all these the box organs, Trauenorgeln, and things like that. And I like the idea of actually playing solo repertoire, particularly contemporary repertoire on those organs, because I feel it's a lost potential. It's a lost potential to only use those to play continuo parts in Baroque choral music and chamber music. They're great for that, but it's a shame not to also have wonderful new pieces by exciting living composers written for them.
Yeah, and some actually organists are actually ashamed of the size of their instrument, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's a different. You have to be very confident, I think, both in your own projection and interpretation of the music and in the music you're playing, because you don't have the same kinds of registration things that one can hide behind on a larger instrument. It's just a different thing. It's a very communicative, intimate experience, and it's a different kind of piece. And it's not about sort of wowing the audience with big toccata flourishes and huge chords that shake everything to their seats, you know. And so that's when you don't have that at your disposal, you have to think in a different way about the kind of music and what you can do and communicate with it. And I believe in having the sort of widest possible experience. And so one of the reasons I focused on this is because it seemed like everyone was doing something different. And so again, the point is just to sort of not to invalidate or criticize what other people are doing, but just to provide something that really wasn't being provided.
And to be able to play just with your 10 fingers, right?
Yeah, 10 fingers, or sometimes just a few, sometimes just like an octave of pedals or a pull-down pedal, or very, very little. And there are wonderful small instruments in all sorts of places around the world. And the tendency is just never to think about them as recital instruments. They're there for practice, they're there for rehearsal, they're there to practice on, or they're there to accompany the choir. But the idea of, no, I'm going to give a solo recital on this, and it's not going to be a gimmick. I think that's an important thing. And in the United States, we have an organization, the Organ Historical Society, that has I think for about 50 or 60 years it's been in existence, and has given, during its conventions, it always includes many smaller instruments as well. And that, that's a wonderful thing that they continue to encourage. But I so encourage places that have these small instruments to use them in a regular way and not think, we can only have a famous guest organist come and play on the big organ on our series. It's like, no, there's all sorts of organists and there's all sorts of organs, and there might be other people who would be interested or able to do something different in a different context. And to have these wonderful instruments for which there is music, both early and new, to have them just heard on their own and hear the beauty and intimacy that's possible within them.
I'm so delighted we had this conversation, Carson, and you're a real champion and actually leader and visionary for what will contemporary music will look in 50 years or even 100 years probably. How would you predict the future? Can you predict the future a little bit?
I really can't predict the future. Unfortunately, I'm very optimistic. In one sense, but in the other sense, I think it's so hard to have any idea exactly what's coming around the corner. But both musically and in certainly other larger ways in the world instead. So I sort of feel all I can do is champion the things I believe in and do the best work I can sort of now, and hope that I can keep doing that for as long as possible. But I don't think I can predict, I can't predict what the world will be like in 50 years. I think there's just too many variables.
All right. And what would be your number one advice for organists who would be interested into either composing or performing contemporary music?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing is simply realizing that it is not some monolith, and you have you sometimes encounter people who are like, well, I don't like contemporary music. It's like, to me, that's a meaningless statement, because the diversity of music that falls into that label today is huge, from music in a sort of completely retro Baroque style to the furthest avant-garde, non-tonal and experimental end, and literally everything in between. And so to just say I don't like contemporary music is idiotic, because it displays a tremendous ignorance of the incredibly wide range of what's being written today. We live in a time where there is no common practice anymore. It's different from the classical era, the Baroque era, or even going into the late 19th, early 20th century. There is no common practice. Everyone is doing something different, and I think that is incredibly exciting. Because the chance for personal expression is very strong. The chance to connect with whatever part of the tradition one wants to do is strong. And I think that also means for someone that's interested in playing or hearing contemporary music, that there is something for you there. There is something you will like. There is a composer or a group of composers or a group of pieces that you will like. Because there's something in every different conceivable way. Regardless of the kind of organ you play or the kind of music you want to play, whether you want to play freely composed music, whether you prefer music based on hymns, it's all there. And so that's I would say is the first thing, is simply realizing this enormous umbrella that exists under which all this music is. And then if you're really seriously committed, seek it, find what you like in it to be able to do it, because you will be able to. And certainly there are any number of ways of doing that, from publications and many recordings online. Things like YouTube and other places online have made it easier than ever to find music. That's what is behind my recording projects on YouTube, is a sense of promoting pieces that I think other people will like, and that I hope other people will enjoy playing. That's how I choose what I play there. Some of it overlaps with my concert repertoire, but it's not necessarily the same thing. I include a lot of pieces that I think are not. Some of them are not pieces that I program in a concert for one reason or another, but they are pieces that could be very useful to people for church or for other purposes. And the point is to just try and introduce people to as many names and composers and pieces that they don't know.
Fantastic, Carson. You're very enthusiastic and absolutely inspiring. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Carson, can you direct our listeners to some place online when our listeners could find out more about you and your work? Sure.
Yeah, pretty much everything is on my website, carsoncooman.com. CARSONCOOMAN. carsoncooman.com. And my compositions and recordings and everything is sort of archived there, and it can link to other places. I do have, as you mentioned, a YouTube channel with many, I think over 1,100 or 1,200 now performances of contemporary organ works that I've given by other composers. Over 350 composers, I think, are represented across those pieces. So, but everything is sort of linked and cataloged there, and it's a lot of material, but hopefully people can find at least something that they like.
Yes, variety is the key, right?
Yes. You put it all out there, and hope that different things speak to different people in different ways, and you never can predict exactly which is the thing that grabs people. I sometimes mentally try to think that this is the one that everyone will like, and I sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not, and sometimes something you didn't even think about is the thing that everyone loves. So you put the material out in the best way you can, and hope that it makes a connection with somebody.
Thank you so much, Carson. Keep composing.
Thank you if he does.
Have you composed today? Have you had a chance to practice today? Not yet, probably.
I have not today, because it's only the early afternoon here in the U.S. now, and so that will come later this afternoon and evening. So.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Keep producing.
Thank you.
Bye. Keep it up. If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.